Hey everyone, and welcome to the very first Give Live webinar. I'm Matt Cromwell, Head of Support at GiveWP.com and WordPress.com. Give is an online donation plugin for WordPress. Our goal is to democratize generosity. We do that by making online donation forms as elegant, flexible, and robust while still being very user-friendly. Unlike third-party platforms, we do not take any commissions from your donations. We leave that all up to you and your payment gateway of choice. That enables you to have lower fees, and that means more people and causes get to host high-quality donation forms on their sites, which is what democratization is all about. So what is Give Live exactly? Well, this is the very first one, so we're making it up as we go, but basically this is a free event that we are testing out. We hope to do this once a month, and in fact, we've already scheduled the next one. It will be held on Tuesday, December 13th at 11 a.m. PST. So we're kind of going for every second Tuesday of the month right now, just like today is. The one in December is going to be called All Things Recurring Donations. So if you are interested in learning about how to do recurring donations and why they're important and how they're beneficial to you and your cause, then definitely tune in next Tuesday, December 13th at 11 a.m. Mark your calendars for that. Today, we're going to be talking about all things SSL. If you're a Give user, you most likely already have dabbled with SSL, or you've heard from me and our support team that you're going to need it. Generally speaking, getting one, installing one, and converting your site over to HTTPS has been a real pain in the past. But there has been a lot of movement throughout the internet towards enforcing SSL for as many sites as possible. So we're going to discuss a bit about why that is today. This is a live webinar. So we do have on the page, if you're on our GiveWP site, watching this on our site, you'll see right below the video, there's a little chat area. There's a couple folks already commenting there. If you have questions about SSL certificates in general, if you have a particular issue that you've been facing, you can chime that in right into that chat box, and I will probably try to work that into the presentation directly. And if you chime in during the presentation, I'll definitely be paying attention, and I can address that on the spot if necessary, or if it works, if it goes well there. You'll also see, I think, right above the video, you'll see our outline for today. So here's what we're going to be talking about. Basically, what is an SSL certificate? Why do you need one? Common myths around SSL certificates. Where do you get one? And now that you got one, what do you do? That's the basic outline of what we're going through today. So feel free to chime in on the comments, and I will get jumping in right now. So first, what is an SSL certificate exactly? The most important part of understanding what an SSL certificate is the idea of encryption. The large majority of the ways in which a site gets hacked or a password gets stolen has to do with the fact that data is easily accessible or readable, and that it gets passed easily on the internet. For most information, it's best that information is easy to access. That's important. Otherwise, you can't see images or you can't read your blog post. But for some information, primarily things like passwords or personally identifiable information or payment information, we don't want that passed in a way that's easy and accessible. Instead, we want to secure that information and make sure that while it's being passed between two places, it's not accessible or readable at all. Paul, I see your question. Are all SSL certificates equal? That's a good question. And I'm going to get to that. I'll do that right at the end of this section, actually. I'm going to write that down right now. Are all SSL certs made equal? Got it. So we're on encryption. Yeah, we don't want certain sensitive information to be passed between two places unsecurely. So let's do an analogy. I'm sitting here in San Diego right now. Let's pretend my donor is in New York. They want to send me a package of donations through snail mail. If they send it through the mail and someone is in Denver and they're nefarious, they can intercept that package, open it up, and get all the donations, no problem. Now let's pretend instead that our New York donor sent the package in the mail, but all the donations were locked inside a box inside of that package. And only I have the key to open that box. That hacker in Denver might still be able to intercept the package, but he wouldn't be able to do anything with it. He wouldn't be able to open the box at all. And so it's pretty much useless to him. He'd let it go, and it would go all the way to San Diego. And in San Diego, I have the key. I'd open it up, and I get everything that I need. So on the internet, with this analogy, I'm still me in San Diego, and the donor is still in New York, but they don't send a physical package. They open up their browser, and they go to my donation page that is using an SSL certificate. They fill out the form, and that information is encrypted so that the hacker in Denver can't decipher it, and it arrives at my server where the key is there to unencrypt it. In this analogy, the SSL certificate serves both as the locked box for the donor and also the key on my server. That's the way I try to boil it down into a way that's easy to understand, basically. So now that you know what encryption is, how do you know whether a site is encrypted or not? Well, this is the famous green lock. You can go to different sites, and you might notice, especially here on GiveWP, you'll see that up at the top, you'll see a little green lock up in our address bar. That's because we secure our whole site with an SSL certificate. And you'll also notice that next to that green lock, you'll see that it says HTTPS. That's how you know that the site is using an SSL certificate. You can't actually send secure data over HTTP. It has to be sent over HTTPS. That indicates that the SSL is being used correctly. That's really important, and we'll talk about it a bit later in order to understand how that now you have your certificate, how do you make sure that you're using it correctly? So Paul asked a question earlier about, are all SSL certificates made equal? There are different kinds, and the two main kinds are basically just a general use SSL certificate, which is the kind of thing that you would get from Let's Encrypt. And there's also another one called EV, it's extended verification. If you go, for example, to bankofamerica.com, they're a bank, and of course, there's tons of sensitive data that's passed over that website all the time. They are using an EV certificate, extended verification certificate. Their certificate requires a lot more paperwork, essentially, to verify that when you land on bankofamerica.com, that it is actually coming directly from the server that has that exact information. If you were to go to bankofamerica.com and you didn't see this big green lock, actually it's more than a green lock on the Bank of America site. We can go there real quick, actually. Let me just illustrate that. You see here on bankofamerica.com, here it is, here's HTTPS up here. And instead of just a green lock, you see their whole name spelled out here. Bank of America Corporation USA. And Chrome has a nice little tool that when you click on it, it shows you even more information all about it. This is an EV certificate. This says that SSL is verified specifically by this corporation. And it has a lot more security in general. In general, for doing standard websites, like my own personal website, for example, you'll see that on my own personal website, it also uses an HTTPS certificate, just like we do on Give. It just has a standard green lock. And that's just a DV certificate. EV is not required in cases like this. But some organizations might prefer it. But it does take a bit more time and effort to get that all up and going. Cool. I see a bunch of folks. That's great. Chatting it up. Cool. So, Paul, I hope that answered your question, generally speaking. Also, GoDaddy has actually a really good article. I'll share it later, but it's right here. I looked around for a bunch of different articles that would really explain these things really well. And honestly, GoDaddy's page does a really good job of that. I'll have links to these different resources after the whole thing is over. But cool. So now we know basically what an SSL certificate is. The next question is, why do you need one? Well, I mean, now that you understand it, I think that just the analogy all by itself kind of clears up why you would want it. But there's a few more important reasons to understand as well. The most important reason is that it establishes trust with your donors. A web-savvy donor knows not to share information over a site that doesn't have that green lock. When they see that you're accepting credit cards on your site and they see the green lock there, you are going to earn points with them. They're going to appreciate that. But that doesn't only apply to donation forms. Any contact form or poll or anything that collects information from your site visitors can be intercepted if it's not sent over a secure HTTPS encryption. Brian, I see your question. What is the minimum, at least expensive SSL certificate option? I will definitely get to that. I think that's in the next section. No, where do I get one? I'm going to add that down here to my notes. Question from Brian. Where's the minimum? Cool. I'll get to that for sure. And so you're earning points with your donors when you're loading your site over HTTPS for sure. There's also a couple other important internet trends that are happening in web development in general that are pushing for the need for more and more adoption of HTTPS across the board. For example, payment gateways. They basically require that your site is using HTTPS in order to use them at all. And in the past, this actually wasn't true with a service like PayPal Standard, where when you fill out a form on your site and you hit donate and it bounces you over to paypal.com. Previously, PayPal didn't require that your site was using HTTPS. And right now, they're actually transitioning that. It's not in full effect right now, but very soon, probably early 2017, even to use PayPal Standard, you're going to need an HTTPS connection. It's important for everybody. Anybody who's using Give right now is going to want to make sure that they are using HTTPS or WooCommerce or Easy Digital Downloads, any kind of transactional plugin or e-commerce plugin, you're going to want HTTPS no matter what. So that's a big trend for sure. Another trend is that Google itself is saying that they are going to start ranking websites that have HTTPS, that are using HTTPS. They're going to rank them higher. It's just going to add a little bit of a boost to their ranking algorithm for your website. Google believes that HTTPS is the future, and they are using their influence to push for this. So even if your site doesn't have e-commerce on it, doesn't have donations on it at all, there is actually an SEO benefit to adding HTTPS to your site. Another thing that they're doing is, of course, that Google is responsible for the popular browser called Chrome. They just announced recently that starting in 2017, you are going to see whether a site is using HTTPS or not. Every single site, essentially. If there is a form on the site in any way, they're going to have a little red lock up in the address bar that says that this site is not secured. And that's a big deal. When you have visitors coming to your site and they see a red lock, that definitely is going to be kind of a shot to your loyalty, to your trust, that they will trust less. This is how seriously Google is taking this issue. They said in their announcement that it's going to start with just a red lock, and eventually there'll even be a little tiny alert next to the red lock that when you land on a site that's not using HTTPS, that it will have a little alert that says that this site is not secure. So those are big deals. I see another question from Scott Lewis. What do you think of Let's Encrypt? That's actually related to Brian's question. I'm going to add that to my notes as well real quick. You from Scott. Thanks for being here, Scott. And I see a question from Anne. Ooh, good question, Anne. I thought payment processors handled all required SSL. Good question. So I'm going to put that on the next section I'm headed into is called Common Myths Around SSL Certificates. And I'm going to start with that one. It can get really difficult to understand exactly how it works, but I opened up the webinar today with this analogy that an SSL certificate is basically encrypting a transaction between two sides. Basically, the browser or your donor over here and your server over here, and the SSL is making sure that that's encrypted both ways. And the PayPal, for example, and we just talked about PayPal standard. PayPal standard is now going to start requiring that your site has HTTPS. It was not a requirement earlier, and maybe that's what you were thinking of particularly, Anne. But because essentially you're taking sensitive information on your website and you're pushing it over to PayPal.com. And yes, they have an SSL. They are processing everything securely over there. But nevertheless, what happens first is that you have information on your website that's getting sent over to PayPal.com. And that's why they end up saying that they're moving towards requiring HTTPS across the board. Cool. Thanks for the confirmation. I love it when people say, yes, that helps. Good job. Another myth, a common myth around SSL certificates. It says some people in the past have said, oh, SSL slows down your site. In the past, there was often issues with HTTPS just running a little bit slower than HTTP. And that's simply really not the case anymore. Internet speeds have come so far in the last few years, and servers are doing so much better with this protocol. Across the board, it's just getting better and better in how data is passed over the internet, to the point at which if there is an effect to your website, it's almost not even noticeable at all. Further, another development that's coming is a new protocol called HTTP2. And there are other folks who are far more technical about this subject than I am, who could answer those questions a lot better. But from what I understand, HTTP2 in a lot of ways has HTTPS built into it. So when that comes along as well, that will basically supersede a lot of this, and it is a much faster protocol than HTTP is. So if it's both faster and more secure, everybody wins. So that'll be great. Another myth is you only need it if you're doing e-commerce. I think the things I was saying earlier about the direction that Google is going and HTTPS across the board, I think that by itself dispels that myth. If you have a form, a contact form on your website, you don't want people to be able to take that information in transit. You don't want other people to be able to access that contact form content before it gets to you. That's why you have HTTPS. Another one, you should only apply it on the pages that you have forms. Really not at the end of the day, especially if you're using WordPress. There's just a lot of issues that can come up if you have to switch your user back and forth between an HTTPS page to an HTTP page. And a lot of it comes from the way that your menus are generated. You could have if only your contact form page or your donation page has HTTPS, then all of your menu items at the top, they're going to say HTTPS on it. And so when you go click on a menu item that takes you to another page that is not forcing HTTPS, then your user is going to get some errors there. They're going to see broken images, all kinds of stuff. So generally speaking, whenever people ask me about implementing HTTPS, I say it's got to be the whole site. Do the whole site because you need it anyway. It's going to be there. It's the future. You can do it now. It's easier. It's better. Last two ones, I'll lump them together. Last two myths, I would say, some people say it's too expensive, and other people say it's too difficult to implement. The expensive part is that basically it's becoming more and more, because it's becoming more and more standard, the prices are coming way down, including things like Let's Encrypt, which I'll get to in more detail in just a little bit. Let's Encrypt is basically free. There are other SSL providers that do free ones as well. Hosting companies are offering their SSL certificates for much more affordable rates as well. It's across the board getting very affordable. too difficult to implement is a different question that I'm going to address down below as well. But most of the difficult part, it should really be done by your host, actually. So that is one that I wouldn't 100% say is a myth, but it's leaning on a myth, because that's part of the reason why we're here, is to help you to implement these things in a lot easier way. Cool. I'm just taking a pause, see if there's any additional questions at this point. Still getting to Scott's question and Brian's question as well in just a bit. All right, so next section, where do I get an SSL certificate? The thing that I always recommend first for SSL certificates is just to contact your web host. Whatever hosting company you have should be able to either sell you an SSL certificate that they would configure for you automatically, or they can point you to how to use Let's Encrypt on their platform, and how you can set that up with just a couple clicks. Your host is the best person, the best place to go to in order to get an SSL certificate. It's definitely possible to go to a third-party provider and buy an SSL over there, and then ask your host to implement that one. But generally speaking, if your host doesn't provide SSL certificates, I would suggest leaving them, because any host nowadays really should be providing them for you. So rather than go into a lot of detail about how you can use third-party SSL certificates, I would just say, let your host do that. Lean on your host for that. Make that happen. And if they don't do it, then I wouldn't trust them very much. Let's Encrypt is an interesting case because it is a third-party system, generally speaking, and it is free. So it's a really good source of a good, reliable SSL certificate. There are hosts that are basically building the Let's Encrypt API into their platform so that you can install a Let's Encrypt SSL certificate through their platform. So that's an excellent route to go, if at all possible. But the Let's Encrypt descriptions and tutorials and documentation on its site is also really, really good. It's really helpful. It can help get it done for sure. And if you are at the point where you need an SSL certificate for online donations, then most likely you are working with a web developer one way or another. He or she definitely can implement a Let's Encrypt SSL on your site for you if your host doesn't do that for you automatically. So that's another great place to get it. And then in terms of buying a third-party SSL certificate, besides your host and besides through Let's Encrypt, the only one that I really recommend is Namecheap.com. They sell really great domains. They do really well with domains. They also do really well with SSL certificates. So that's the only one that I would recommend besides your host, basically. All right, so that's the summary of where to get one. Now I have these questions from Brian and Scott. Brian says, what is the minimum and least expensive SSL certificate option? I think that should be answered now, which is Let's Encrypt. That's definitely the cheapest one. It's free and it works. It's a great service that they're providing. It's definitely a big reason why we're able to go forward while the whole internet is moving really hard forward towards HTTPS for everybody. It's a great project. I highly love it and encourage it. And then Scott just says, what do you think of Let's Encrypt in general? That's what I was just talking about. It seems like a good entry-level SSL solution, but only if your host supports it. Well, that's the issue. There is the issue of the auto renewal, and that is a problem that you do have to basically be renewing it every 3 months. That's a little bit of a security feature, which I think is good. Cool. Glad to hear that, Brian. Thank you. And so, for example, one really good implementation at a host level with Let's Encrypt is actually SiteGround. They do a really great job of supporting Let's Encrypt SSL certificates, and they handle all the auto renewal for you. They're really great with that, and there are others as well. But that specific issue with Let's Encrypt is exactly why I would lean on your host to implement it, because it's just not something you want to be messing with in terms of dealing with the auto renewals and whatnot. but it's an excellent option in general. Cool. Last major section we're going to get into is now that I've got an SSL certificate, what do I do? Or AKA, how do I convert my site to HTTPS? So basically, once you have an SSL certificate from your host or through Let's Encrypt or Namecheap, then you have it, but you're not actually using it yet. Like I said earlier, you know that Bank of America is using it because you see that big green lock at the top and it says HTTPS. So you have an existing website, you have an SSL certificate, but your site is going HTTP. You need to transfer it, convert it into HTTPS. This is an issue that a lot of our Give users came across, and so we actually wrote a pretty detailed document about that, and I'm just going to walk through that really quickly to cover it. So this is our documentation page, and it goes through basically exactly how to do that. And I'll provide this link. Actually, I'm just going to put it in the chat right now, so everybody has it handy if they want to read it, because it might be a little bit small on the screen. So a lot of this is talking about stuff that we just discussed. Purchase and install I'm basically talking about how people should be using, getting their SSL from their host. And I have some instructions from different hosting companies that they each provide on their own. But then the very first step after you have your SSL certificate is to update your site URL. This is the very first step. This is done in WordPress itself. You're going to go over to your settings. It goes basically settings and then general. And right there at the top, you're going to see your WordPress address URL and your site address URL. And you'll see here that we already added it here to be HTTPS yourdomain.com. What's going to happen as soon as you hit save is it's going to kick you off your website, and that's important. It's a little bit jarring, but that's basically meaning that you did it right, because now your site is going to be loading over HTTPS, but you had logged into it with HTTP, which means that your login credentials are now for technically another website, because these two protocols do technically mean they are two different sites. So when you hit save after changing this and you get logged out automatically, that's correct. You did it right. Now that you've done that, you can still access your website through HTTP, and that's a problem. You don't, basically, when you're enforcing your SSL certificate, you don't want to be able to access your website via HTTP at all. Also, if you are concerned about your SEO, you also don't want your site to be accessible through both methods, because it will get indexed in Google with both methods, and then problems can arise. So what you want to be doing is you want to force HTTPS throughout your whole site now, so that every time anybody enters your website, it's going to automatically load with HTTPS and not HTTP. The best way to do this is with your htaccess file. This is something that's at the root of your website, at the same level as WP admin, WP content, WP includes, or also with your WP config file. This is also something, if you are absolutely uncomfortable with this, you can definitely reach out to your web host about this. And I have done a lot of different implementations of this, and I have found that this snippet right here tends to work the best with WordPress sites. If you do a Google search for how to force content to HTTPS, you'll find a lot of different htaccess rules. But this is the one for me that I found to work pretty much 9.9 out of 10 times. And this is something that you're going to add to the very end of your htaccess file. You don't want to replace anything that's already in there. You just want to add this to the end of it. All right, so at this point, you have changed the site URL of your site, and you have forced the traffic to go to HTTPS via htaccess. And now when you go to your site, you're going to notice that you probably see something like this. There's going to be a little yellow lock, or you're going to see that your images are broken, that they're not loading correctly, or that your site really doesn't function well at all because your JavaScript are being loaded over HTTP instead of HTTPS, so they're basically broken. So this is the next step. There is a plugin out there called Really Simple SSL. I don't recommend it, honestly, because it doesn't actually change the protocol of your scripts and whatnot. It basically does it with JavaScript on the fly. So every single time your page is loaded, it's changing the protocol on every single script and every single image. And I just think that that is unnecessary because you can do it correctly and not have to do that kind of JavaScript work in the browser to get this to work correctly. The way that I recommend doing it is with a plugin called Better Search Replace. What this is going to do is actually, and a lot of people get really nervous about this, and understandably so, but basically it's going to do a search and replace in your actual database. So it's really important that the very first thing you do before you do this is to make a backup of your database, and you should know how to get that backup back activated in your database in case anything goes wrong. But what's great about Better Search and Replace is that it also has a feature called a dry run. It will basically, you can type in the things that you're going to search and replace, and then you can make sure that it's on the dry run, and it will run without changing anything at all. It will instead, basically, it will show you what the results would be of your search. It'll say, oh, we found 85 instances of this, and it would be replaced all 85 times on these different tables, but it hadn't changed anything yet at all. And I think that's really useful. And then you say, oh, okay, that looks great. Those look like the right results. So then you turn off the dry run, and then you run it live. And it does the search and replace right there. So real quick, but here's what you're going to be doing. Here's what you're going to be searching and replacing. In the search and replace tab, you're going to do the following. You're going to be telling it to search for HTTP of your domain, and you're going to replace it with HTTPS of your domain. But you don't need to do that through the whole entire database. Right now, all we really needed to do is with your posts and your pages. So in the select tables area of the settings, you're going to select WP Post Meta and WP Posts. And then you hit search and replace. And here's a screenshot of what that looks like, basically. Here's the Better Search Replace settings page. And here's the search for. You're going to search for HTTP, and you're going to replace it with HTTPS on these two tables only. And you can leave these unchecked. And then here's the dry run setting. That's checked, so this is going to do a dry run. If you want to do it live, uncheck it and hit run, search, and replace. Once that's done, another thing to keep in mind, this mentioned here, is whether or not your site is using www or not. Make sure that you pay attention to that as well. If it is, you're going to want to make sure and put http://www and replace it with https://www. We want to watch for that. Occasionally, you'll still run into problems that maybe your theme is hard-coded some of its links. That's not a good idea for themes to be doing at all, but occasionally it happens. And this section is going to go into some of the ways that you can deal with that as well. Once you've done all of that, you're basically done. You've done it. You've converted your whole site over to HTTPS. You should be seeing green locks on every single page. And what you're going to do now is go to your Google, that's supposed to say Search Console, not Source Console. Found an error. Update your Google Search Console. This is if you're using Google Analytics at all, indexing your site that way. then you're going to want to go there and update it so that it's indexing your site with HTTPS now, not HTTP. And that's a really important step so that because now all the traffic is going to HTTPS, and if Google is still looking for traffic on HTTP, then it's going to tell you that you don't have any traffic at all. Well, of course not, because nobody's going there anymore. They're all going to HTTPS now. So make sure and update that there. Cool. I didn't see any more questions come in at this point. I know that was a lot of information, but that's why we wrote the article about it, that you can read at your leisure and do what you need to do. And that is basically all that I've got for today for all things SSL. If there are any other follow-up questions, I'll sit and for just a minute and wait for other follow-up questions to come in. Feel free to say, nope, you answered all of my questions. Amazing, great job. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. Thanks, Ann. Thanks, Kevin. Cool. Looks like I addressed most things. Definitely, if you have any other follow-up questions in the future, then you definitely can reach out to us through our contact form. If you're a Give customer, of course, you can log into our support page, givewp.com/support. Our contact page is givewp.com/contact, and you can reach out to us if you have any follow-up questions. Cool. Good to hear, Scott. Yeah, Paul, a Give t-shirt would be just a little